because I've also got another, fun enough, a tender to put in regarding the BSA and all those things as well. So if that's okay. What I will do, so I don't know whether everyone was in the call last time, but one of the things that we as architects are being asked to help with in terms of clients is Jarek and I, and with input from the BIM for Housing community, created that sort of Miro board for a workflow diagram for sort of really new build HRBs and various sort of information kind of links to HSE website, information.gov.uk. So we kind of shared that, and that's had good sort of feedback. But mindful that actually we're now getting a lot of clients, whether they're local authorities, housing associations, who obviously have a lot of existing stock, and they've got multiple sort of demands in terms of improving, let's say, the thermal properties of those buildings to meet sort of national and their kind of own internal local targets. So simple like upgrading to meet EPC ratings, for example, or kind of net zero targets. So what we wanted to do was in this forum is to kind of get feedback from others' experience of doing similar projects. I will share, there was two scenarios that I shared, and I think, George and Richard and the team shared as well, but one was really to do with works to existing HRBs, and I'll go through, and we had reached out to the building safety regulator. They're very quick actually in terms of responding, with setting up a meeting to discuss strategic queries that we have about the application process, not technical. And the other one was really a project that we're bidding for, which I just mentioned now, for recladding an existing building, which I think is sort of more straightforward, and I think yourselves will have had more experience than me. So let me just share my screen to just kick off things. Can everyone see that? Just let me know if you can.
Yep.
So in terms of and again, you yourself might have had experiences already, but in order to get any sort of advice from the BSR from a process point of view, this and I'll share this on the thing. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just share all of this on the chat right now. Sorry, I'm just going to go back to the other screen. I'll share this on the chat so everyone has access to it. And I'll go back to sharing the thing. But this email address and this sort of subject matter or heading is what has been shared with us and should be used to generate a request for any sort of strategic discussion with the BSR. There's a gentleman called Josh who replies. So a lot of you might have seen him on the webinars from the HSE. So he actually emailed back, and we set up the call to discuss it. It was sort of a half an hour talk, but it was free, and he was willing to kind of have further follow-up meetings if required as well. So that was really useful kind of in terms of the email address and subject if you got queries. In addition to that, he shared this one, which is contact the building safety regulator link, and that's an online form for, again, further sort of clarifications if you need in terms of understanding about duties a bit more, or some of the submission sort of application guidance. Again, nothing to do with answering the technical queries, because that's really something that they've said many times they're not going to do. Another thing that came through from information is this recent sort of request from the Freedom of Information, and it's quite telling in terms of the time frames that are actually been taken for new build projects, existing projects. So the top two are for the approval, but there's also in terms of rejection, they're taking quite a long time, even just to reject it. I guess that's to kind of give them time to go through the information that's been submitted and feel that it's not adequate. So that's some serious timeframes. Even one to get approval, but actually the rejection timeframes are probably more worrying in a way, because you could be waiting there for months and then you get pushed back. So that was Freedom of Information on 17th of February, so very recent. So I guess something to kind of be mindful of if you're advising clients or you are a client in terms of programs. So the project that we're working on at the moment that I'm just about to give a fee for, the contractor client is taking a pragmatic view that, well, after Gateway 2 submission, they'll just stand the team down pretty much till information is requested or a decision has been made by the BSR. So it's not really costing anyone, and I guess making the client aware that that's the process that they're going to go through. So that was just another bit of information. And finally, this is the scenario that that I talked about, that we had the discussion with the BSR with. The scenario I'll just kind of give you a highlight is local authority client. They have something like 147 HRBs, which have already been registered. However, they don't necessarily have control, let's say, of all the properties within each of those blocks. Some are clearly their tenants, but some are leaseholders, properties who may or may not want things done to their apartments. So essentially, they've got 147 HRBs, but they only have control or access to percentages of apartments within those. And the works that they're looking to do is simply speaking, internally insulating the external envelope wall. So nothing to do with doors or fire detection or anything like that, just simply installing internal insulation. Some of them is internally having to be done because of the fact that they're listed buildings. So changes to the facade are also difficult. And interestingly, the actual works may only take 2 or 3 days to complete. So one of the things that we didn't know about was how would that affect in terms of the need to kind of notify the BSR about when you're starting work, when you've commenced work, and when you finish work. So if you only sort of got 2 or 3 days to kind of to come in and do the work, they all sort of fall into one day essentially. There's not much huge difference. However, the access to those different apartments within the HRB may not be possible in one go. The local authority may have to wait till the apartment is free because maybe the tenants are away on holiday, or just some suitability in terms of the actual work that could be done. So those are the kind of questions that we had, and then we raised to the BSR. And their feedback was, and we were looking to maybe use an archetype approach. Archetype in the sense of coming up with build-ups, products, details that could be used on one apartment, but actually would relate to pretty much all the other apartments in the same block. Now, if the blocks are multiple blocks built exactly in the same, cut and paste that we see in some estates, we were then asking also the question, well, can we use that as a kind of a blanket approach, an archetype approach? And this is really the feedback that we had. So they view that one application for multiple apartments in one HRB is a potentially viable strategy. And what they noted was that already the HRBs would have been registered or should have been registered. Therefore, however they've been registered would determine how applications for the works would need to be submitted. So the idea of sort of submitting an application which covers 4 identical blocks, HRBs, was not something that they felt could be done. However, multiple flats within one HRB could be covered under one application. The thing that they said that needs to be mindful of is a kind of a detailed construction control plan and a strategy, I guess, for undertaking the works, because it affects the completion certification. So in terms of when this commencement and the starting on site, so once we got the approval from Gateway 2, the works have to start within 3 years. That's a kind of a given. But then also trying to identify when 15% of the works. So simply speaking, if you've got, I guess, 100 apartments, you need to know and notify them when 15 of those apartments will be completed, in order to kind of define that commencement of the works. So, and then that, as I said, impacts on when you get the completion certificates. Because these tenants are already in situ, there's no need for the completion certificate to be there for them to continue to be able to occupy that their homes. Unlike obviously a new build where you need that completion certificate for the HRB to be registered before anyone can move in. So that was quite interesting. So it could be that there's a request for completion certificates by every time you finish works to a floor, or I guess the whole block, for example. So that's something that the client or the contractor would need to kind of develop and put forward as part of the construction control plans and the strategy. And an archetype approach may be possible, they said, i.e. what we've done at the moment is gone into some of the flats, we've surveyed it, we've developed detailed section drawings, build-ups, specifications, etc. But we've only been into, let's say, one of, let's say, 10 apartments which are similar. So one thing that we've kind of gone back to them and said, well, they definitely need a floor plan of each floor of that HRB. Now, whether that needs to be super detailed, I guess depends on the work. Now, in our case, we're simply proposing to do works to that internal wall. So my mind is that actually from as a building safety regulator, sort of building safety sort of PD role, well, we are kind of saying, well, it's compliant, and here is where the works are going to be done. So we would have almost key planned, more general arrangement plans of every single floor. We'd identify the particular flats where the archetype section would apply to, and then say, well, in our view, the design is compliant and the works are compliant with the functional requirements, etc., and they apply to these buildings. If obviously you're doing works which are changing the layout of the flats, or I guess works to communal lobbies or anything like that, then clearly the level of detail in those plans need to be much more kind of comprehensive, I think. But for the work that we're doing, I feel, rightly or wrongly, that actually a set of generic floor plans which covers every single floor, each where the section that we've developed is applicable, we would note that on the drawings, and that would then, along with the specification and data sheets, etc., we would say, well, that's enough to kind of for in our view to kind of comply. So that third sentence there is something we would need to really test, and that's something that the regulator said is you're best off almost putting one application rather than doing an application for all of the buildings in one go and all of them getting rejected. Do one as a pilot, see how it goes with the technical team within the BSR, and then take it from there. And that really is that ultimate, clearly ultimately the client and the BSR, PD, PC needs to ensure that they've justified why the information we provided is demonstrating that sort of functional requirements and complying with building regs, etc. So that was so like I said, I think the process in terms of applying for feedback and having a workshop was very quick, and they came back within a day or two. The meeting was very useful, very kind of open in terms of dealing with it. And interestingly, they hadn't had this scenario put forward to them, which sort of surprised me, because I would have thought that actually a lot of, especially local authorities or housing associations, would have this scenario. But it was good because I said then we'll obviously share in this forum what we found. And really the next step is for our client to take that. We've already developed the archetype information. We've now got to take it to another step of generating the being appointed to generate the information for a Gateway 2 application. So obviously keep you updated. So yeah, that's really the feedback I have at the moment. It'll be interesting to hear whether you've had similar experiences or other experiences. And obviously going forward, any sort of case study presentation would be great. And Matt, you got your hand first, and then Ben, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Daz. Just a quick one. You mentioned about the rejection times for the submissions. Was any reasoning given as to why they are the length that they are? I mean, the other thing, I'm assuming that there is a potential for them resubmission after the rejection, is there with potential changes. So Was there any justification given for the extended turnaround time of a rejection?
No, it wasn't myself who put in that freedom of information request. It was another party who then shared those dates. So I don't think from the kind of webinars and stuff that I've been to, it could be as simple as that the basic set of information hasn't been submitted, like information about the project, for example, or suitable plans and sections and details, or it could be that the what they're proposing in terms of the justification of the regulation that the team are following, and therefore how they've aligned to that regulation or that British standard or whatever it may be, is actually not strong enough to bring, I guess, in a way, comfort to the BSR and their multidisciplinary team they're looking at. So no is the simple answer. I don't know, and I'm not sure how. I think that would be more on an individual basis that they would provide their feedback. But previously, it has been everything from something very minor to something quite fundamental about the design.
But they've not given any justification on why that takes so long.
No.
In answer to the question, Matt, really, the problem is that there's just too few people. They don't have enough people. They are bringing people in from a range of different organizations like Bureau Veritas to actually do it, but they just don't have enough people. I think they're completely overwhelmed.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
I think it's also the case that, as Daz has said, there's quite a lot of the submissions that aren't really fit for purpose. So some people are really doing their best to do it properly, and others are. I heard of one where somebody had actually written on their submission, "I don't know why I'm having to do this."
Right. Okay. So some of them are just sort of almost thrown in, hope for the best, are they? George, or?
It would appear.
Okay.
Ben?
I think just picking up on George's point, I think though those sorts of submissions are an exception rather than the rule, and I think that the BSR's continued citing of them is doing a disservice to the vast majority of people that are killing themselves trying to stay alive in the industry when there's just a concrete dam across the whole thing. And we're doing our absolute best, and unfortunately the regulator is not coming to the party. My original point though was, but I do, I'm not saying that those examples are not true. They probably are, but I don't think they're representative of the majority, which I'm sure you're aware of. The key point was just to dig into that FOI response that you received, because I did one myself in December, and they kind of swerved my question slightly. So my question was, how many new build HRBs have been approved? And they didn't answer that question. They gave me a response that said this many applications have been approved. And I don't think that wasn't the question I asked. And what I'd be really interested to understand there is, so the average time between submission and approval for new build projects being 26 weeks. So I'm aware of, I myself facilitated the implementation of two of the first applications, which were done in middle of February 2024, and I believe we were one of the first HRBs to put in a Gateway 2 application, probably because everyone else was clever enough to put their applications in before the 1st of October, whereas we weren't quite ready. So we had to then obviously go back and do all the prescribed documents and whatnot. And I just wonder, what is the data set that average time between submission and approval for new build projects is based on? Because if it was none, the first application being put in, assuming it was ours for argument's sake, in the mid-Feb, and to now, an average that by dividing it in half is 26 weeks. So, there was talk of there being a hill project that had been approved in Walton-on-Thames, but we've looked into that, and it's not a new build HRB. Actually, it was not representative. So, have there been any new build HRBs that have been approved? That's what I'm trying to get at.
I think I saw on LinkedIn a couple of posts, for example, like Safersphere, who I know are another sort of BSA advisor / PD services that they provide. And that, I didn't look into detail, but that looked like a brand new building that they had. And that was something I think they posted a couple of days or last week on LinkedIn. But I can ask. I think I'm just looking back at, there's another set of stats by September 2024. So last year, so 6 months ago, I guess now, and it had 14% of the 1,000 or so Gateway 2 applications were approved. Only 14%, 20% of them rejected for being invalid. Again, whether they were for new build or refurb, I don't know. But the general trend is that we're not. If it's only 14% of 1,000, we've got a long way to kind of, I guess, a lot of learning to do, I guess, or the scenarios are so difficult, or whatever. So, and the reasons they gave at that was for things like the mandatory information wasn't provided, insufficient competency declarations, the compliance statements were not specific, golden thread of decision making not evidence, and a focus on health and safety, not building regulations in the submission. So those were some of the things that was noted and feedback back in 6 months ago.
That's interesting, because those are the things that we had to obviously, they are obviously additional to a conventional application. We got a validation quite quickly on that. So within 3 or 4 weeks, they came back and they had a question on the on one of the letters that we'd provided about competence, but that was responded to and then approved. So the application was validated quite quickly, actually. So all of the prescribed documents were acceptable without changes. But we are, I stopped counting at about 26 weeks, but we're in, I think, week 54. And we still haven't got a proper response telling us, that it's been approved.
Well, maybe one thing, Ben, I could maybe suggest is it will be useful, I guess, if it's possible, for you to do a little bit of a show and tell of what the scheme was, what a high level of what you submitted, just so that, I guess, for me, being a visual person, it's quite nice to see, well, what was submitted and level of detail, and I'm sure it will be sort of useful for the team here, if that is something that is possible, maybe at the next session.
Okay, I'll need to discuss that with my colleagues, because we've got a consultant team, and we found that the consultants have really come to the table on this and put their best foot forward, but a lot of that work, for example, the building and regulation compliance schedule, is something that we've developed together, and they might be the consultant team might be a bit reluctant of having put so much effort into it.
No, understood. And maybe it's only not a deep dive, but more of a high level. Well, this is what we had to submit. This is what it looked like approximately. But just to get a bit of a flavour and the timescales that are that you're kind of working with. George, you got your hand up?
Of course.
Yeah, I've been asked to join a working group in ASFP, the Association for Specialist Fire Protection, and what they're trying to do at the moment, it's a golden thread working group, and what they we've only had the one meeting, and what they are talking about doing is asking if people are willing to share their the feedback or the rejections from the regulator, so that they, as ASFP, can identify any sort of consistent things that then can be worked on. Now, clearly, Ben, I think you're quite right. There's a level of confidentiality there, but on the other hand, if everybody's doing stuff uniquely, then we're not going to get through some of this stuff, are we? So I don't know whether that might be something. If some credible organisation like the ASFP would be doing this, I imagine that they'd be happy to have some sort of Chinese wall, sort of, or whatever the term is, some sort of confidentiality that could then be doing that. I don't know whether you think that's a good idea. Seemed sensible to me.
I think so. I mean, I would have no issue with it at all. I just want to be respectful to all the organisations and don't want to necessarily assume that they would be in the same position. But certainly on the golden thread piece, I know I did that myself, and I'd be more than happy to share that around, because I think the more we all work in the same structure, it's just going to make everyone more efficient, isn't it?
Definitely, and I think that obviously could have an impact on the regulator's ability to actually start to respond more effectively, because if they're more standardized methods of reviewing these things, the better. I was also...
They've done that on the safety cases as well.
Yes. Sorry, who has?
Well, obviously by stating that they won't be prescriptive and just letting everyone kind of do what they want, they've then created a problem for themselves, because everything's different.
Definitely.
But then on the safety cases, they've now produced a structure, so everyone can then follow the structure, and it's just going to make everyone's lives much easier. It's
Agreed.
just a shame they didn't do it a year ago.
Yeah, I was at a meeting last week, a workshop that was organised by Risk Flag, who produce safety case software. But there was lots of building safety managers there. And I raised the point that Daz made about these archetypes and the fact that individual schemes are struggling with that. And there was a guy from Newcastle, I think it was, who was saying that this is relevant to you, Alistair, I think. He was talking about ventilation. And what he was saying was where you've got you guys would know much better than me, where you've got a smoke vent or something like that that's going up the whole of the building. One of the big challenges is all of the different interfaces from individual apartments, would that make sense, into that. Each of those could be an individual submission to the regulator, because each time that happens, that's supposed to be signed off. And that was something that I thought was relevant. The other thing is I also go to I go to a working group of building control people. So there's basically, it meets every couple of months, but I raised this with them last week as well. And they're quite interested in seeing if there's something that can be done there as well. So because at the end of the day, it's not just about the regulator, is it? It's actually about notifiable things that are relevant to compliance with building regs, irrespective of whether it's an HRB or not.
That's useful, Ben. I just kind of go around the screen, see if anyone else does. So, Nikita, I'm just picking on you because you're on my screen on kind of getting counterclockwise. Are you from a housing association or local authority, or have you had any experience with any of the applications before?
No, not yet. I work for a main contractor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And you're acting as like design manager, for example?
Correct.
Or,
Correct. Yes, I am. Yeah.
and maybe working on HRBs going forward.
Correct. Correct. I am working on one at the moment, but it fell under the transitional period, so we don't actually have to follow the gateways. However, we are tendering for projects which will do. That's why I'm in this group, because although we managed to escape it this time, it won't be the case moving forward.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're taking the same approach where we as a practice is we're kind of a bit like what we did with the various BIM standards and naming protocols, etc. We've kind of applied it across the board. And even when it comes to specifications and material choice, because there are, various nuances or different requirements with Part B and then HRBs and so on and so forth, we're kind of taking the view, well, let's just look at and specify materials which would be compliant, whatever the height of the building and whatever sector, and using protocols and methods that capture the decision making on all projects where possible, because the reality is the goalposts are going to change at some point in the future. Okay, that's cool. Paul Smith, I don't know if you've got any experience with this. I'm just going around again on the
No, so I'm from an architect, Fairhurst. We're part of the Bond Bryan group, and Bond Bryan do have some HRBs on the books. I guess I'm here with an interest as far as like the documentation standards and stuff and where that's going, because that'll be I'm part of the BIM team, so we're looking at like that to try and gauge where the industry is moving to make sure we're up to date. But
No, that
I
makes sense.
don't have experience myself on a HRB.
Well,
George is probably able to respond to that actually more. Go on, Rod. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say we've got a working group in BIM and asset management looking at handover information, Paul, that you might find useful. Standardizing health and safety files and M&Ms and the whole handover piece. So you'd be welcome to join.
Yeah,
that.
that'd be good. I think I may have put my hand up for that. I can't remember.
Okay.
At the last BIM in asset management call.
We've also got an event next Wednesday, which is it's a sort of masterclass in 360 photography and scanning and all that sort of stuff. So if anybody's interested in that, that's at 11 o'clock next Wednesday. If you're interested in it, put your name in the chat. If you just put 360, then we will send you an invite.
And Paul, I guess are you one of the things that we're doing, I guess, within DMA is the trying to, I guess, standardize through creating of content, so content library, and then ensuring that's then, or those, whether they're individual components like doors or assemblies, are then also linked to the specification. So trying to do as much as we can as an architectural practice to standardize and use kind of known or agreed classification systems like Uniclass, to make sure that we've got that sort of audit trail. We use BIM 360 as our internal, let's say, common data environment, and that sometimes is shared and others interact with it. But now that sort of Autodesk are moving to the ACC, new name for BIM 360, one of the things that we're thinking about is that even internally, should we be raising RFIs, issues within the team when we're, let's say, commenting on our own design or commenting on other consultants, so that there is a more formal audit trail of the decision making leading up to, let's say, a Gateway 1 or planning or tender or Gateway 2 application. Because typically at construction stage, the contractors will be hosting the CDE. So there is a discussion about, well, you sort of have to go to package it all up, transfer it across, and then also then another transfer of that information to whatever the system that the clients use. George, you'll be more aware of this. So there are potentially still 3 breaks in that golden thread, but if you look at the kind of, I'll just share the Build UK guidance on Gateway 2 and the golden thread definitions, because golden thread definition is quite vague in a way, but it's kind of useful to kind of refer back to. I'm just going to also share the Miro board link again with the password to enable you to see the work that we've done previously to kind of help work your way through whether determining the existing buildings are HRB or the work you're going to do is HRB or not. If you haven't seen it already, again, any comments are helpful, but I'll share that, and then I'll share the 2 Build UK PDFs, which are also quite useful in terms of a good checklist for the Gateway 2 submission and the golden thread definition as well. Anyone else? I don't know. Terrible.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, because I've been internally trying to encourage the use of ACC for design issue tracking and commenting between teams, but admittedly, I see, a lot of pushback from people wanting to kind of keep doing it the old way, as it were. It'd be interesting. Have you seen, so like our on the Bond Bryan side, who I've not necessarily had a load of, so we've just been bought out, so I am still kind of getting used to the Bond Bryan team, as it were. They've got golden thread building people, but I'm trying to remember the term, but but essentially, so they've generally been tracking via, like, say, an Excel spreadsheet, which tends to be like, a typical one of, keeping a list of RFIs and decision tracking. Are you seeing much uptake on your side into the ACC? Is that like, do you enforce that, or is it like you just encourage it?
Yeah, I mean, we're a smaller animal, I guess, in terms of that, because there's sort of 25 of us across the Liverpool and London offices. So it's easier than, I guess, the task that you've got, and bigger organization as well, and a kind of umbrella group. We're about to move to ACC. We haven't done it yet, but typically the team that we have is quite. There's a bit of resistance, probably from the older team, fun enough, because we're kind of older, stuck in our way. The younger team are more easy to kind of get them to work in that way. So we just sort of propose it. We change the sort of systems and the workflows, and we just sort of really get on with it. Like I said, it's easier because we're not a big ship that we're trying to turn around, and that's always been historically the kind of our advantage in a way, being smaller. But Bond Bryan, I know, with like people like Rob Jackson, who's left now, but it would have had lots of protocols and systems in place, because he himself and I guess the BIM team there were really knowledgeable about all those things. But I think it's just a case of yourself, but also maybe speaking to more the senior teams. We're lucky David and Fiona are very pro making sure we've got systems in place, so they kind of back the kind of R&D team when we kind of say we want to do something. So it's not a lot of resistance, just more kind of the older team resisting because we're older, not because we don't want to do it properly.
For sure.
So that's I probably get told off more than anyone else about it, but the younger team are kind of always up for it. So I think you just have to get that and make sure that the senior team are on the same page as you are when you're implementing these things, and really just try it on all schemes and start small is always what we've tried to do. So as I was saying to Nikki, we just try and use it on all projects, so it becomes a standard workflow on everything. So even just naming protocols, so then it becomes more second nature. If you try and pick and choose what you apply one process against another, then that actually makes it harder because it's not business as usual, I would say. So it might be a little bit painful on smaller projects, but in a way they're easy ones to work and get it wrong. It's better to get it wrong on those than on a new build huge HRB, for example. So there would be my bits of advice, I guess.
Yeah, good. No, totally good advice. It will be an interesting one. We've got a further complication in that Von Brian generally use ArchiCAD, which is separate to Autodesk, so it kind of, you know, but yeah, all good stuff.
I'll just say, Harshal Singh, I don't know if you've got anything you can experience you've had on this subject.
I actually just joined. I'm really sorry. I just got in like 5 minutes ago, so I'm still catching up.
That's okay. What's your background or kind of specialism?
It's BEM, including modeling and creating schedules and that, managing software
Okay.
recommendations and all that.
Okay, excellent. Well, look, I mean, thanks for coming in there. I'll go around. Shahir Alam. Cool. I'll keep going around. Jump in whenever. Chris, anything else you would, or Patrick? Any sort of insights or experiences you might have had?
So my interest at the moment is generally as teaching a professional practice course at De Montfort. So having just left ACOM, we were very much involved in trying to understand the intricacies of what's going on. I don't think we got particularly very far before I left. So I'm kind of reapproaching it from a small practice academic side at the moment. So not much to add at the moment, but very interested. And as I learn a bit more, I will be feeding back.
Thank you. And so were you an architectural?
Sorry, yeah, I was working in the asset consultancy team. I led the life cycle costing consultancy piece in their strategic asset management team. So I'm an architect by background, but I did join ACOM as a consultant rather than an architect.
Right. Okay. Fine. And now you work for is it research or an academic practice?
No, I decided it was time to retire and have some fun, and then I got approached by De Montfort, who said, you should know a lot about professional practice, so come and teach it for us. So I'm doing a part-time role for them at the moment, just as a bit of an interim, and thoroughly enjoying it.
Oh, okay. That sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I guess in that combination of the asset management, I guess that's something with life cycle, which is clearly kind of going to be relevant to owners.
Absolutely. Well, most of the work we did was for large estate owners, hospitals and academic institutions. So understanding large programs of works, what's refurb, what's new build, what actually comes under which regulation. So it's something that I'm still working with George on to understand. So there will probably be some feedback from the two of us. And just as a bit of a rocket right back to the beginning of my career, I did work for Von Brian in the old days when we were just one office in Broomhill. So happy days, you've joined a big club.
Well, I guess
yes, indeed.
What would happen is that in things like hospitals, like the feedback that we had from the BSR meeting, I guess is relevant to or depending on if you got a program of works. So I think Correct. One of the things that Josh was saying is that, you know, if you got a program of works in a wing, for example, and they may be, you know, separated by time, I guess. What seemed to be coming back from the feedback was you don't necessarily have to put an application every single time you want to do something. George, in a way, that example you used about connecting to a central riser, what they were sort of saying is, well, you could put an application for the whole building to do works to that whole riser and connecting from each residential unit as one application, but you need to kind of define a timescale for when the works would happen or may happen. If it changes, that could be controlled through, you know, the kind of the change control mandatory occurrence or the change control process or that route. So you're not having, you put one application which you may change rather than many applications which would kind of clog the whole system up again. That was sort of the kind of high level feedback I was getting from Josh. which I think is helpful.
I think the complexity that we've also found is that most of my asset work has been in PFI for AECOM, because that's where the life cycle piece was wanted at the time. And just trying to understand the difference of approach between what is classed as general maintenance and upgrade through to capital works, which would require project control, is an interesting one, because they're usually led by different teams. So just trying to get the alignment between the approach between the maintenance teams and the capital projects teams, and then the client's capital projects teams and maintenance teams, has always been a little bit complex. And I think that's something that's going to be teased out by these regulations as to who has to own what and what applies to what.
Yeah, and I guess simplifying it from the building safety regulator's point of view, the feedback again is, well, if it needs building regs compliance, it needs building regs compliance. I guess the internal organization of that entity, and whether it's maintenance or not maintenance or major project, sort of doesn't come into, I guess, their
doesn't
kind
give
of
into
thinking.
theirs, but it comes into a lot of clients as to who actually owns this and who is actually being the responsible person for the sign-offs and the compliance with the regulations.
Yeah. One thing I'll just pick up again, the proposal that I'm about to make today is an interesting one, where there's a block of residential, there's sort of 9, I think there's something like 12 or 13 buildings within a little estate. Some are HRB, some are not. The technical client is almost like a residence committee, which have been created, but their skill set to be a client is, I think quite limited in terms of all these new regulations, etc. The contractor who's going to do the work will, and I think they've got an estate agent actually in the committee to kind of help advise on certain things. But that's one of the issues is, we're kind of being asked to do the BSA PD role by the contractor, but they may not be the client. So then there is that kind of technical issue about, well, if you're not appointed by the actual client, then we can only be the advisor, you had to be the PD, etc. So there are some nuances and the kind of skill set of these client organizations who may actually own, they've got something like 12 or so buildings on site, a couple of them are HRBs, but they don't realize their duties themselves. So there's some very basic upskilling that's still required, I think, across the board for residential, care homes / hospital owners, before we get to any of the nitty-gritty in itself.
But it's further complicated if you're in a housing association that has shared ownership, because suddenly there's a whole host of other owners, occupiers, who have various rights depending on the contracts they've signed. So who is the client?
Yeah. Patrick, any sort of similar experience or anything on that nature from your side?
No, I don't. This is a different scale of operation. What you've been discussing. I mean, my interest continuing is both as a client for leading a small project team in Wiltshire for some community-led housing, but also because of another community-led housing project that George knows about, that was much larger. The only sort of, I suppose, the difference, the topic that hasn't really come up, is I took part in a Southwest regional group meeting online, and most of these are architects drawn from, a lot from sort of the far Southwest, so Cornwall and Devon, and a few in Wiltshire and somewhere else. But the problems that they have in understanding what their roles should be on considerably smaller projects, and the lack of understanding on part of their clients, and this seems to be completely. It goes right the way back to Portland Place. That the guidance, their perception as the guidance that the RIBA have provided, has focused, as always, as a constant recurring gripe, on larger practices, and not for people that are operating at perhaps up to 10 people, and certainly not in the micro practices. and there is just complete confusion and a desperate need for better guidance in taking on the role of PDs, really, at any level, whether it's under the BSA or just CDM.
Well, actually, Patrick, I'm meeting up with Chris Williamson in next week or two. So if you've got some particular points to make, drop me a note, and I'll pick up with him.
Yeah, okay, I will do it. I'll go back to the individual that set this up in the regional office and try and pick up a recording from them, because that was actually quite generally quite a good thing. I mean, it's to address the smaller practices generally.
Yeah, well, I'll drop my email in my professional one rather than my Demantford one in the chat.
Yes. Okay, do that. That'd be good, Chris. Thanks.
No, that's very good. I think Patrick, you made the right point, because I don't know whether it is exactly true or not, but something like 80-90% of architectural practice are sort of sole or partnerships, for example.
Yep, absolutely.
In the kind of country. When I did the RIBA BSA PD course, there's a lady called Kerry Barr, who was sort of representing the sole practitioner in the presentations. And I thought she was very clear in terms of, so she may, I'm sure she's kind of, happy to kind of share her knowledge as well. So Kerry with a K, Kerry Barr Architects. And you're right, because the Building Safety Act's competency requirements are obviously across every project, every sector. And not many people know that either. And a lot of kind of contractors, maybe if they're not, even if they're tier 1 or tier 2, and you get further smaller down, they are not necessarily able to demonstrate their competency, especially if it's like a D&B, for example. So because they don't have a design kind of lead or kind of capability. So that's also kind of problematic, I think, at the moment, in terms of a client being able to say, well, yes, we've appointed them, but actually we're not 100% sure technically that they can demonstrate their competence. We think they are. And that may take out quite a large chunks of sort of contractors, for example. But I did find Kerry's sort of explanation of what she did on domestic projects, non-HRB, is quite good, quite clear. And in many ways, it's not different to, I don't think, what architects should be doing or would be doing, which is, identifying the project, identifying the regulations that apply, kind of ticking them all off, and then moving forward. So it's more the process that she did to kind of, I guess, document that in a sort of slightly more digital way, if questions were asked or evidence needed to be provided later on. So that was kind of the bottom line, I guess, in terms of what she was presenting.
I think that's what smaller practices need is, I mean, the RIBA documentation and guidance is top heavy and geared for large projects and large practices. And my experience is that most contractors are still struggling with their duties under CDM. We've had those for long enough. The idea of anything that, even just protecting their own interests, quite apart from new requirements, to recording what they've done during the course of a contract and recording it adequately, and not changing things along the way. I think they're completely ignorant and consider that this is something that just doesn't apply to them. And obviously there is a commercial pressure on smaller clients to cut corners and listen to a contractor that says, we can provide you with an adequate service to deliver your building, because we can build it, not because we can actually do anything that is now required. And so that, if it's the difference between 200 or 220,000 £220,000 of everyone is going to follow the money. And that it only comes out in the wash much later on. And I think there are aspects that we could be considering, which, I mean, you might consider that asset management for individual houses is a daft idea, but actually it shouldn't be that difficult to demonstrate an added value in premium value to a property. Anyway, even for things that are really quite small. But we don't try and do that because it sounds as though it's a lot of work. But if we were to start on that route, I don't know, we'd certainly make retrofitting, deep retrofitting, far more effective and realistic for people.
Well, to be honest, even talking life cycle with individual domestic clients, when you get the message across, is it's not about what it costs you, what it costs you to own and how long you're going to be here. They start to think about things differently. I mean, the whole thing about life cycle is thinking differently about the same questions, asking about the cost of ownership, not the cost of purchase.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a different scale.
Yep.
No, but I think Patrick, it's actually a different scale, but it applies to probably a much wider net than the HRB ones in many ways. So everyone's individual homes and all the terraces that we have in the country, etc. So, but no, I think I actually do think contractors have got a much harder thing to be able to, for us designers to design, to share, to kind of say that it's designed is compliant is easier than actually for contractors to demonstrate that they built it and it's compliant, because there's so many more moving parts and so many more people that they have to kind of almost kind of manage and check and audit. Someone actually the other day talked about, there's obviously historically there's always been that comparison between car or airline manufacturing, etc. Whereas I think the idea of offsite manufacturing has had certain pros and cons and case studies, but what was quite interesting about what the gentleman was saying is not necessarily that we should necessarily follow the airline industry in terms of how they build things, but their checking process is, they have the kind of 3-point checking on site with different people double checking and stuff in a similar way that we would in a practice have 3 points of check. Does that kind of thing get done on site? Is that something that contractors are having to kind of resource? Because that's really, again, I guess that's the work that George, you're looking at as well with the 360 capture on a timeline basis to be able to peel back. So maybe it's the kind of auditing and checking process of the automobile/airline industry that we can maybe learn more from necessarily building it something site being the focus. Has anyone else got any sort of thoughts or queries? Again, like I said, if anyone's had any experience, it'd be really good to kind of get more of that in the coming weeks, and I'll obviously share how I'm getting on in the two scenarios, one which is the existing HRB sort of in retrofit, and this sort of external cladding project that I'm bidding and hopefully we'll be starting in a month or two to kind of see how that goes. But so I'll definitely have 2 case studies that I'll be looking to kind of give you incremental updates on. But yeah, if anyone else got anything that they don't mind sharing, whether it's a submission that went well or things that didn't go well. And then what we'll try and do is, like the Miro board that I shared, the aim is to maybe create a couple of different workflows to deal with these hopefully typical scenarios. One being, let's say, the HRB archetype, one being this kind of recladding, one being could be the kind of more domestic scale projects, so on and so forth, so that again, it's got as many people inputting it from their experience to hopefully give something that everyone can follow to try and ultimately we want to reduce those times, because it's in our interest to make sure that projects are going forward, because otherwise we've all got nothing to do. So we need to do stuff to make it in a way easier or easier for the BSR to get things ticked off. And this is really all part of what we're trying to do in this community, is to keep everyone employed and keep building things ultimately. So yeah, sorry, Pavitra, you had your hand up?
Yes, if you don't mind. So we've been in discussions about, so I personally don't have experience of this, but our team is looking at various aspects. The 2 themes that we've been talking about is the assurance of the design process. Evidence of compliance would be quite interesting, i.e. is there from the root RIBA standardization to the standards working out, and the variance that you've got is, can we do any automation? Can we do speeding up of how we gather evidence, how we do design coordination and assurance? And then the whole of life in mind, i.e. the client has a duty of the golden thread. You might have different variations of what does that client look like who's managing the golden thread. Not a lot of people have got understanding of that, but how does the design merge into the golden thread? And then how do you do something called performance design or variations of design as you go along? So change control, change management. So about 3 themes are quite interesting and they're quite tough. There are other organizations that are looking at regulatory compliance automation. So it's just linking this group to what's actually happening in the marketplace so that we have a consistent approach, that nobody's doing the hard lifting together. If there's a best practice or a best practice guide that you've sort of talked about, or do we need one, that would be another thing to trigger. But thank you for the chance. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. George, there's probably a couple of groups that you could link Pavita to in terms of the golden thread, and because Pavita's from a CDM predominantly background, but working, on with an Arcadia, so large, working on the Curzon station and stuff. So the kind of big scale of infrastructure. But there's probably a couple of things, George, that you have you could link Pavita to. I guess the only thing I would say from a design point of view, what we do, and just sort of it's about sort of taking it back to the basics of we try to for example in our assemblies within the Revit try and build in compliance. So for example, a Part M bathroom, Part M43 bathroom, we've created versions which are compliant with the building regulations. So we know if we use those assemblies in our projects, then they are compliant. So not having to kind of start from scratch every single time you do a resi scheme. So assemblies can be interesting, whether that's, I guess, an external envelope build-up or a bathroom or a kitchen or bedroom or train station or whatever it might be. Ultimately, it's the technical requirements of building regs haven't changed. It's more just that evidencing. We talked before a little bit about using, let's say, the Autodesk software and using RFIs issues, which are electronically, you can keep a tab on the decision making, which then again allows you as a design team to maintain that decision making audit trail. And then how those different design teams then meet and to create the one golden thread, or I don't know, maybe it's George, it should be a golden rope, because a rope is made up of lots of threads or something, something along those lines. But if they're the kind of little things that we're doing. So, I guess basics will be simply keeping notes and actions of all the decision making. And I think as the gentleman talked about before was, keeping an Excel RFI tracker of decisions, who made them, when it was made. So it could be as simple as that in a way, or more clever and automated and AI and all sorts of things. But I think it just got to kind of step back and think basics, and then what technology is out there that you're already using or could use to make that more watertight. But I won't say anything more than that. I don't know, George, you might want to jump into any of those things.
Yeah, Pav and I are talking anyway, and Pav's been a very active contributor to Birmingham Asset Management. So I think, Pav, you're aware of what we're doing in that regard. I should say that the 360 workshop that we've got next week, we've got about, I think we've got about 35 people already signed up for it. So, Pav, if there's anybody else you think it might be useful to bring in from your colleagues, that might be a worthwhile thing to do.
Thank you, will do.
Well, thank you very much. I think there was on the chat, the Clerk of Works, bring them back. Call on the chat that I can see. And in fact, funny enough, we are seeing that on a residential scheme for local authority, not for HRBs, funny enough, but the client has appointed a Clerk of Works who, I guess the trick.
You've gone on mute.
Oh, sorry, my bad. I was just saying, I've just seen on the chat the call to kind of bring back Clerk clerks of work or clerk of works, and on a non-HRB residential scheme for a local authority, the client has appointed a person. One thing I guess is finding, I guess, people who've got that level of experience to kind of to kind of question, I guess, what's happening, and then but I guess they can't also be there all the time either in terms of that construction period and time. I think some contractors are using almost package-based checking, auditing people within their own organizations who might be a specialist in curtain walling or, you know, precast facades and whatever. So that is they're the kind of, I guess, things that I've heard about that people are using to try and document or evidence or quality check things that are happening. Matt, you got your hand up?
I was just going to say, Daz, the issues with the clerk of works role. The last time I can recall active participation from on a project with the clerk of works involved was probably about 2013, 2014, and whether that was in official capacity or not, but that was the role that they were appointed by the principal contractor. And the problem was that to expect somebody to be an expert in sort of all areas of the building works is sort of perhaps unrealistic. So the sort of questions that I was working on development of the design of the dry lining package at the time, and the questions that were being asked were not really the questions that should have been asked. So we're being asked to justify bits and pieces that were justified quite easily by manufacturers' information in terms of standard documentation, not relating to the fundamental design items that should have been justified and were, but it wasn't necessarily immediately clear unless you understood the design in detail. So whilst I don't think it's a bad thing to bring back, I don't agree that the clerk of works role should have ever been removed anyway, but I do feel it needs to be, certainly in today's climate, a lot more detailed. I think there need to be individual package specialists that need to be saying what questions need to be raised. It's still being left too much to manufacturers. And just in relation to Pav's comments there is information that is available both from specification stage all the way through to construction in terms of guides. I mean, I'm obviously more familiar with the dry lining and internal fit out versions, but there are, so certainly our industry advisory body has specification guides, pre-construction and construction based guides that that we've actually developed with them, and they are published to all sort of their members. So there is information out there. It's just at the moment I don't know how well it's being utilized throughout the industry.
Yeah, and I think that role of the BSRPD, I mean, again, in the tender that I've been responding to, had said something like, "Oh, you know, your role is to check the design is compliant," but it's not. That is not the role of the BSRPD. And you're then working on the weakest link. So there is this. That's why I guess in a way, nothing much has changed in terms of, yes, you've got the client is ultimately responsible for checking competency, and then the contractor's responsible for checking the competency of their subcontractors, so on and so forth. So it's that kind of weakest link, and each party ultimately has to be doing their own checks and balances to be able to sign those declarations at the end. So it does rely heavily on that kind of chain of command almost. It's a bit like the army, I guess. You know, if everyone does their thing, then everything will work and go in the right direction. So I agree. I mean, the clerk of works or any other person who's doing a QA role can only do so much, but then it does require everyone to, as I say, kind of make sure they're doing their bit correctly. That's why I think it's quite hard for contractors to kind of be able to, at the end, as a principal contractor sign, say that we've built this building and it's compliant, because they've got to somehow be sure that it has, and that's much harder than designing it to be compliant.
But in some cases, compliant with what? I mean, we're looking at design intent that assumes that it's going to be achievable with tested arrangements. It never is. So it's a matter of the principal designer looking back on that and saying, well, we've designed something, we've supplied an intent that's not achievable with tested systems, but we're happy to approve the level of risk from the information that's been provided. And I think we talk about compliance too much as is it backed up by test information? And on that basis, we assume that there's far more testing than there actually is to justify any of the stuff that's being built. So I do agree that in a way there needs to be more focus on compliance. I think that's always a good thing, but I think it's also very important to be realistic about what compliance looks like, because at the moment there's a lot of misconception on that topic.
Agreed, Matt, and I think that's where that, how much can you bring forward in terms of those specialist for a Gateway 2 application procedure, let's say, when it's a non-HRB, that design during stage 5 and stuff still can occur theoretically. But on this ReClad project, for example, even though we'll be starting from stage 1, the agreement with the contractor is that they will appoint for design input as well the actual manufacturer who's going to be installing that cladding, and that's as much I think you can do to kind of make sure that the design works within the parameters of installation, testing, data, or whatever. But I realize that that's not always possible for every package and every level of that package in terms of design or delivery. But that's what we're here to share, I guess, isn't it? What the kind of benefits are. Has anyone else got anything? I've seen there's some more conversational items on the chat, so thanks for all that input. Anywhere, and anyone else got any other comments or queries before I sort of wrap up? No, well, look, thank you very much. And yeah, and what we'll do, I'll feedback. Sorry, Chris, did you have something?
No, I was just saying thank you for a very interesting start to the conversation.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Like I said, I'll continue to kind of provide feedback on hopefully these 2 live projects. And like I said, I think that's where we will then be able to generate those Miro boards so that it's not just talked about. We want to get actual outputs from these meetings. The Miro board, I think, is the best way to capture these sort of workflows. Any other ideas, obviously, please let us know. But if you do look at the link that I sent in the chat, again, if there's any experience which is different to what we wrote, please do let us know, and you can comment on it using that password. So if you use that password, you're able to comment on the Miro board, and then we'll pick them up and review them incrementally. Because the reality is that was a moment in time when we understood what we understood. And as things change, we want to keep updating that. And I think the aim of this design group is to generate some more Miro boards for existing buildings and scenarios which are not covered in the sort of more easier theoretical new build HRB process. But yeah, have a great week, and yeah, catch up next time.
Thanks very much, Dave.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Good to meet you all. Bye.